Hi, and in this video, we're talking about forecasting. First, what is forecasting? Forecasting, in my mind, the most rational way of creating the highest probability outcome of forecasting is the idea of applying all of one's knowledge and experience to making a prediction about an event or series of events in a specific time frame. It doesn't have to be a specific time frame, could be a general time frame, could be a yes or no question. Will XYZ be elected to be the Prime Minister or the President of the United States? That's not time bound, it's yes or no, etc. So it could be specific or that, could be general. When will Labour be voted into the UK government? And that's again specific with the time frame. Or there's lots of different ways how you can structure questions, but the idea is trying to predict something in the future that where the outcome is unknown. Could be specific, could be general. When did I start forecasting? I think I started forecasting more. I could say I probably started when I started investing, because I think if you're an investor, then you have, if you're a good investor at least, you have to kind of get into the role of being able to think about the future and predict certain things, whether it's number of customers, number of users, number of sales, profit margins, etc. And you have to get into the shoes of the CEO, if you like, or indeed an investor, and thinking about how could that business grow? How could they recover in some cases or whatnot? And I had some experience of forecasting from investing. Even before I went out and sort of became a bit more public about forecasting, I was doing it in my own private investing. And I have to caveat to say, I don't have much money. I only started with a small amount of money. It grew, but it's still, abjectly small and absolutely, as well as relatively small. Nevertheless, I started in investing. So what did I do? First, I looked at Domino's Pizza. I invested early on in Domino's Pizza in about 2008, around when it was about 50p, something like that, 50 to 100p. I think it's had some stock splits since then. I exited eventually when it was 1000p, albeit there was a bit of buying and selling, so I didn't keep it the whole time. I was getting confused with margin of safety and high valuations, overly listening to the value investors out there and forgetting about the growth. Nevertheless, I looked at the store counts and I was forecasting how Domino's was going to grow. And I accurately predicted that it was going to go from like 50, 100 stores to over 1,000 in the UK. And that's exactly what happened. It hasn't always been the right way. I did, forecast that Tesco were going to do very well. I invested alongside Warren Buffett, although he didn't know me at the time. And later he went on to say it was his worst investment ever. Thank you, Warren Buffett, for that. I did actually sell my Tesco shares and I bought house builders because I forecasted that the house builders would go up in value. They were incorrectly being kind of detrimentally described by all the journalists out there as being kind of basically they all thought they were going to go bust in 2010 when there was a housing crisis, the housing crash and crisis. And I thought, nonsense, all of the UK house builders can't go bust because of the deficit in housing. And I forecasted a cyclical uplift in the house builders, and that's exactly what happened. So I had done some forecasting in my investment career, whether it was with cyclical companies like house builders or growth companies like Domino's Pizza. DOM was the ticker. And then spin on a bit, and I bought a property, and I didn't have as much money to invest, but in there was a certain period of time, I think it's 2020, my dad gave me a small sum, as he was selling his business or something, and he had some money to give away to each of his children. And I could see something. I accurately predicted around that time that the new virus that only had a couple of thousand patients, people, sick patients with this disease. I predicted it would become a global pandemic in January of 2020, and I also predicted more and more in February and March. And despite people thinking I was mad, I was accurate, and then that's exactly what happened. And in the end, sadly, millions of people died from the disease, which is known as COVID-19. But when did my forecasting, from then, like, I thought, how, I could tell that this was a disease that was going to, expand. And I thought to myself, well, no one was listening to me at the time, on social media. Maybe I should have contacted MPs and the government. Anyway, I was public about it, and I was being shouted down by friends and family. And I decided to not be public about my forecast for a bit. And I predicted that stock markets were going to go down in March 2020, and that's exactly what happened. I put on options, which means leverage bets on which way the stock markets were going to go, and I did that in the S&P 500, the FTSE 100, and a few other stock market indices around the world. And I accurately predicted the biggest crash since 1987. It was late March 2020. And that got me interested in forecasting. I also predicted interest rate rises off the back of the money that the governments were pumping out globally. And I fixed 3 mortgages in Q4 of 2021, saving me and my family and my business partner around £200,000 over the course of the term of the mortgage of about 5 years, when you compare it to the interest rates. Because I secured ours at, I don't know, I think the interest rates were like 0.5 at the time, something like that. And we fixed the mortgages at 1.8, and they subsequently went up to between 5 and 7%. That was the rates the banks were offering. At least the base was a little bit lower. So I saved quite a lot of money there. And then, I predicted inflation and interest rate rises. And as I mentioned, I've fixed mortgages. And then I decided to predict other things. I went into sports betting, and I accurately predicted certain trends in the sports market. For example, I predicted Aston Villa were going to do very, very well in the year 2022 and 2023. And they did. They came 4th in the league. Had they not had the injuries they had, I'm pretty sure they would have come 1st or 2nd. People will argue in the comments about that if they ever see this video, but I'm the forecaster, and what are the people making comments? I had a lot of people making comments at me when I talked about the growth of the different variants of COVID. Turns out they were, sadly, they were wrong. Day-to-day forecasting, that's kind of what I do for work. I do marketing, advertising, and companies around the world entrust me with thousands, if not millions of pounds to invest in the marketing, in media planning and planning advertising. What does that mean? It means they give me their money to spend on advertising and investing it, in the right types of markets to the right people, and I need to forecast the returns for those businesses. And I suppose now I've started to do it more publicly on the Good Judgment SuperForecasting network, where a bunch of other forecasters get together and just forecast for different organizations. Sometimes it's for governments, sometimes it's for organizations like The Economist and organizations that are putting together documents or helping decision makers like intelligence agencies or big investment banks like UBS and whatever. So I've got involved in that. So why, what's the way of getting better at forecasting? I think the best way of being good at forecasting is I'd say 3 things. It's coming to your opinion based on or coming to your judgment based on thinking about all the factors in play, and kind of stripping out like biases and your own experience to a certain extent, only to a certain extent. And coming to that judgment and then inverting it, kind of flipping it on its head and thinking, well, if I was going to be completely rational, what about the reverse? What would be the absolute opposite of my thinking? And what's the probability of me being wrong and it going the other way? And the third thing is kind of reverse engineering, what could happen. And I suppose the other thing, actually, I should have said 4, The last thing I would say is extrapolation, which a lot of people struggle with. They don't understand compounding. This is why nobody could accurately predict a global, or very few people could accurately predict a global pandemic.
My name is Keaton. I'm a senior account strategist with Google Ads. How are you doing today?
Yeah, not too bad. Sorry, Google phoned me. Where was I? Extrapolation. People really struggle with that. People don't understand growth rates at all. For example, they don't understand growth rates at all. So they don't understand like doubling and tripling. It is really difficult. So like 5 doubles is like a 32x. So it's not like, you know, some people might think it's 5x or 10x. No, it's 32x. And 10 doubling, so 1 double to 2, double to 4, double to 8. You know, if you go on, 10 doublings is 1000x. So people like really struggle with that. It is quite hard to do. I'm learning that. I think there's a little bit of intuitiveness about that within me, because I could accurately predict that, you know, COVID was going to become global pandemic. You know, and the house builders were going to do better. But I didn't have it written down. It was maybe intrinsic, and I hadn't like calculated it using a formula. But I do think extrapolation is another thing that's really important. Obviously, if you extrapolate incorrectly using a bias, or, you know, maybe an emotion, that can actually drive the prediction kind of way off. So that's probably one of the most difficult skills, the extrapolation, like accurate extrapolation, because like most people can use spreadsheets and extrapolate in different ways, and they forget lots of different things. The human element, they forget about how long things take or how quick things can take. For example, viruses grow very quickly, but human activity can be quite slow for lots of different reasons. Decisions take time. You know, obviously, the seasonality, cyclicality in terms of macroeconomic factors, microeconomic factors in terms of, you know, the family wallet and share of wallet and discretionary income, and all sorts. So there are different factors depending on the decision you're trying to predict. But yeah, I think kind of, yeah, being kind of logical and practical and thinking broadly, as I mentioned, inverting things, reverse engineering your outcome and seeing if there's anything there, and extrapolation. So you're kind of playing with it. You're not just coming to like one decision, which is like your emotional decision, like I think this because of this, and there's quite a lot of people that are fixed like that. I'm suggesting you actually work with the framework where you come to conclusion, taking in other sources, not just your own, not just sources you agree with, for example, and then inverting it all, reverse engineering different outcomes and extrapolating. And I think there are kind of 4 different ways, you know, where you can look at kind of anything really. You can look at anything, and it can help you predict it. And I think the key thing to think about is like indisputable trends and patterns. I think that really helps me in my work where I do, you know, marketing analysis and forecasting and whatnot. But I think it's the same with anything. Like the reason I knew Aston Villa were going to do really well, is because the market had completely underestimated the genius of Unai Emery, the manager at the time and the time of filming, and also the genius of players like Leon Bailey, who they weren't playing full games, but they were really impacting the game. And I think that's to do with football, right? But there are there are kind of undeniable patterns in every field, but there are often things that people don't always take into account. And that's the kind of thing which really does like swing forecasts, because there's a lot of kind of mimetic behavior where people just copy each other's ideas and like groupthink and whatever. Certainly in the media, like what I saw with house builders, and, you know, independent thought and contrarian thinking is quite difficult. But if you can crack that, then you can definitely become a forecaster. And I just think there's so much value in learning how to forecast. As I've already talked about, you know, investing helps. If you can forecast interest rates, you can save your family hundreds of thousands, if not millions, on mortgages and loans and whatnot. And it can be quite helpful for your career as well, because you can forecast which careers to go in and out of. I forecasted the growth of digital marketing in 2012, I think it was, and thought it would be a good market to get involved in. So I got more heavily involved in it. I think actually I started probably, I don't know, 2008 or something, maybe before. So it can help with careers as well. I'm going to leave it there. If you are interested in learning more about my forecasts, you can join the Good Judgment platform, and you can find me on there. I'm Jake Welford, and you can follow my forecasts if you're interested. And I'll leave it there. Take care.